A very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers around the Caribbean and further afield. We are so delighted that you have tuned in to Let's Talk. Of course, Let's Talk is an interactive talk show hosted by the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the South Leeward Conference. I am Dr. Greene, your host. And today we are going to be talking about a very important subject. Should I take my brother to court? Legal issues and the Christian. This has become an important issue in the very litigious society that we find ourselves living today. And when we have issues like these, we find professionals who can address the issues adequately. Just before we introduce our special guest, we would like to invite you, our viewers, to bow as we have a word of prayer. Eternal Father and our God, we give you thanks for the privilege and opportunity to be able to share with our friends in radio lands. We thank you for this media whereby we can reach around the world to all of our viewers. And we pray that as we discuss this very important subject today, that your spirit will lead and guide. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So to all of our viewers, we do have viewers from various places around the world. We do have viewers from the South Leeward Conference territory. Of course, we do have viewers from around the Caribbean. Very popularly, we do have people watching from Trinidad, from Tobago, from Dominica, from Puerto Rico, from North America, from France, from the United Kingdom. We want to say a very special welcome to all of you who are joining in at this time. As indicated earlier, we are going to be talking about the subject, or the topic rather, should I take my brother to court? Legal issues and the Christians. And for today, we have our special guest, attorney Marvalee Franklyn. She is a practicing attorney at law in the country of Barbados for the last 23 years. She's also a law lecturer at the Barbados Community College for the past 18 years. She holds a master's degree in international dispute resolution with specialization in arbitration from the University of London. She also serves the church as an elder and women's ministries director. So she is going to be giving us the perspective of the attorney and the perspective of the elder. She is also coordinator of the ASI Mission 2000 and Beyond, which mobilizes and deploys our children and youth to mission and evangelism across the division. We are so delighted to welcome our special guest, Attorney Marvalee Franklyn. Attorney, good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk.
Good afternoon, Dr. Greene. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want to say thank you for having me. And good afternoon to the church family from across the region, wherever you're tuning in from. Good evening, and let's hope that we have a good talk this evening. Let's talk.
I observe that you are very active in your church. Happy to hear that. I do remember some years ago when we were organizing a missions program that I was in contact with you. So it's good to know that you are advancing the kingdom of God while you're practicing your legal elements there. We are discussing this afternoon, Attorney Franklyn. We are discussing a subject that is an interesting subject. I want to begin by clarifying some terms. You know, as a child, I feared the courts. I had a fear of the court. I saw it as a place that sent people to prison, and that scared me. When I became a Seventh Adventist, still in my mid-teens, I learned, correctly or incorrectly, that Adventists should stay away from the court. I have since, however, learned that the court falls within the third branch of government, the judiciary. So maybe we can begin by explaining governance and where the court stands and the role it plays. Sister Franklyn, can you just expand on those for us?
All right. At this basic level in our democracy, we have basically three branches of government. You have your judiciary, you have your legislative branch, and you have the executive. All right. And the court functions, and I think the court is important to democracy. The court functions when the founders, you know, and whoever our framing fathers were looking at our legal regime, it was necessary for them to have checks and balances in the system. Yes, because of human nature, you know, because of human nature. If left unchecked, human nature tends to overreach. So if your parliament and your politicians are left unchecked, then they tend to overreach, and there may be decisions taken that have implications to the citizenry, and you have a right of access to the court to review those decisions. The executive may be tempted to overreach, so you may be in a situation where decisions are taken about you, whether you're hired or fired in government, whether contracts are, you know, given outside of policy requirements and that kind of thing, and the court functions as a check and balance in terms of the distribution of power in a society. And the court also has mechanism that the court check and balances itself. Yes, so I really think the court is indispensable to our democratic engagement. And we have different challenges to the court, and we have different safeguards. Yes, so the court is really important. And as such, the lawyers then are officers of the court, even as they represent you. So we are necessary too. Just have to put that in for the lawyers, all right?
Thank you so much. That's a very interesting perspective. You know, and I'm thankful that you explained that. You are highlighting that the court, the judicial system, plays a central role in governance. So I need therefore to begin to change my perspective of the court system and not be afraid of the court anymore.
It sounds to me as if you were probably traumatized by the criminal aspect of the court, you know, because we don't only go to court when we are wrong. Sometimes we go to court for the court to pronounce on issues that affect our lives. Yes? So it's not a situation where the police is going to come and pick you up. Sometimes you need access. So it's not always that you have a grievance. Sometimes you need the court to interpret legislation. You need the court to pronounce on certain actions because it has far-reaching impact. Yes, and sometimes it's the only place you have to go.
So I should see the court as my friend, therefore.
The court is always a friend to the law-abiding.
Yeah. Oh, to the law-abiding. Wonderful, interesting. I want to just for as a matter of launching into this discussion. As we consider the court and your explanation, that was very helpful. But what's the difference between the court, the High Court, the Supreme Court? Then we have the CCJ, Caribbean Court of Justice, or the Privy Council, depending on, you know, we're speaking in the Caribbean context, of course. Just so that as we talk, we can get a good perspective of these elements.
Yeah. It has started raining by me, so I'm not sure if you're hearing rain.
I'm hearing you very clearly.
Yeah, but we welcome the rain. Now, our courts basically function on a hierarchical system. So see a pyramid or a triangle, yes? And at the lower end of that, you have your tribunals, and above that, you'll have your magistrates court, which are seen as inferior courts, all right? Then you have what is called the Supreme Court, which is basically your High Court and your Court of Appeal. Because it's called Supreme Court doesn't necessarily mean it's the final court of the land, all right? And above that, you'll have your highest court of the land. There are some territories that ascribe to the Privy Council as their final court, and some of us are with the CCJ, right, as the highest court of the land. Now, the court functions on a system of precedent, in the sense that you rely heavily not only on legislation, but also on principles that would have been developed from case law, previous cases, all right? So the system of precedent operates where the higher court binds the courts that are lower, All right. So the magistrate court, for example, is bound by a decision of the High Court where you have a case of similar facts and we have similar principles being challenged. All right. And the High Court then would be bound by the decision of the Court of Appeal on a case of similar facts and where similar principles are being challenged. And generally, your highest court does not necessarily bind itself, because I guess it takes onto itself the discretion to change its mind, you know, in emerging contexts, you know, kind of thing. So each lower court is bound by the court above it. So the magistrate court and your tribunals and your commissions, etc., they're called inferior courts, and they take guidance from the ones up above. So that's, in a nutshell, the system of hierarchy and the system of precedent, how we conduct our business in the court. That is why, to a significant extent, when you go for legal advice, a lawyer should be able to tell you what the court is likely to do in your case, because there are precedent.
Interesting. I want to, I'm almost tempted to ask you this question very quickly, and then we get back to where we need to go, because, you know, recently we had a discussion on CCJ versus the Privy Council, and I know that in some territories it's the CCJ, in some territories it's the Privy Council. I heard lawyers arguing in one jurisdiction that they don't want the CCJ, and then on another hand I heard that, yeah, we should go for the CCJ. What's the big difference there, just for the sake of our listeners, in terms of whether it's the, my perspective is that we are independent nations. We should invest in our own human resources, etc. But just a word on that, and then we move on.
Yeah, but I agree with you. You know, if we're emerging democracies and we're independent and we have been at it for a while, 50 years, 60 years, we should be developing our own system. You know, we need our own final court of appeal. The other thing is, I think a lot of people pronounce on the CCJ is given an emotive response. I have been, and I found no fault with the system. You know, I take the commendation when they give it, and I take the critique on our unique situation in Barbados when they give it, because it's true. Yes. And one of the things you find in terms of the Privy Council is that when you are sitting in judgment, it is important to have a sense of the cultural context in which the court operates, as opposed to just looking at the strict wording of probably a piece of legislation or etc. You need to have an understanding of the culture. And by far, the Privy Council is far removed from our situation in the Caribbean. And I think really our court, born from our own experience as a territory, is more beneficial to us, and it should cost less.
Thank you so much for that very interesting observation. Well, how now that we are clear on these terms, you know, the various whether magistrate court, what the role of the court is, let's get back to the question: should I carry my brother to court? So to begin with, how does a matter get to court? You know, is it that, well, somebody does me wrong and immediately I say I'm going to court? What's the process for getting to court?
Well, I'm basically, first of all, you have to count the cost. And I always say that, you know, you have to count the cost. Now, whether I don't think in this form we can say, yes, you shouldn't carry your brother to court, or no, you shouldn't carry your brother to court. You look at the Bible and we'll come back to that, you know, as a religious scholar here. But there's a process. So basically, if there's an issue, you can try to settle the issue. Generally, there's an attempt to settle the issue between parties. Then you may move on to people hiring the lawyer, get a lawyer to write a letter. If the parties agree and you know, and can settle the issue, then you know, that's the end of that matter. But then other people lawyer up, and then you have the back and forth between the attorneys. And if it is a situation that you can't resolve it, then there are certain matters that the court need to have sight of. And I'm talking in this instance, in terms of the civil law, the court has the jurisdiction over criminal law, and I do not think we have a right as Adventists to try to cover up things and take them from under the purview of the criminal law. Where the criminal law is concerned, all crimes are against the state. So we should not be negotiating our way out of crime. That's different. But in terms of the civil realm, yes, generally attempts at negotiation and resolution is generally tried. So for us, most of the time, the court is a last resort, because you advise litigants that going to the court is costly and it takes a lot of time.
Now you're making, sorry to interrupt you, go right ahead.
Not a problem, we're talking.
You're making a very important distinction there. You're talking about a distinction between, did I hear you say criminal
law, yes,
and civil?
And civil law.
Yeah, so I want to zero in on that, because let's first talk about the civil aspects, right. And specifically, let's assume that I have an apartment and I rent it. I rent it to a good brother in the church, and he fails to pay me my rent. I may approach him. I say, listen, the rent is due 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and he is not forthcoming. Do I therefore go to a lawyer? Or, because we're talking about civil matters here. I do have the right to get my money because we had an agreement. We have a contract. He's supposed to pay so often. But now that is an obligation based on the law for him to pay me my money. When he does not, I have the right to take legal action, don't I?
You do. You do. And that is a situation we have across the Caribbean, especially in these times where people, landlords are all across the country. They're crying out because rents are not being paid, and their mortgage obligations, the property that needs to be met from those rental income, and they're not coming in. Yes, so people are you're not only renting because you want to get rich quick. Most of the times you have commitments to the banks and stuff. Now, back in the day, people would have gone and you tell them get out of your house and they're not moving. So you take off the window, or you take off the door, or you turn off the electricity, that kind of thing. We are not permitted that law to do that. Yes. So at some point when the person is clearly showing you that they have no intention of honoring their obligation to you, you need to get them out. And the only way you can do that is going to court, because if you go, you see, even though you may not have had a written lease agreement, there are certain terms that the law will read into that contract, whether you write it or not. So for example, a term of that rental agreement would be that the tenant must have peaceful and quiet enjoyment of the property. So even you're the landlord, if you go and mess around with that, then the tenant can turn around and sue you. Yes? So you really have no recourse than to move at law to get an order for possession, because you can't turn off the electricity on them. You turn it off and they claim that they had thousands of dollars of meat in the empty fridge. And because you turn off the electricity, you allow the meat to spoil. You're now liable in damages, even though they owe you your money. Yes? So there's no recourse than to get an order for possession to get them out. And it's a long process. The court just don't do it overnight and you're able to evict somebody like that. When you see them in the newspaper quarreling and crying, sometimes the landlords have been at this for years. And even having gotten them out, the chances of recovering your money is slim in most of our territories because they're not able to pay.
Now you are an elder in your church.
Yeah.
Imagine these two individuals were both members of your church. Would it not look a little, embarrassing for two brothers from the same congregation to be going to court, arguing, fighting over, payment of rent? One may say, and we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, a very interesting passage of scripture there.
We go there.
It does appear that Paul is suggesting in this passage that, why carry your brother to court? I want to read the passage because I find it interesting. I'm going to read it from the New King James Version. It says, "Dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law before the unrighteous and not before the saints? Do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world will be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? Do you not know that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? If then you have judgments concerning things pertaining to this life, do you appoint those who are least esteemed by the church to judge? I say this to your shame. It is so that there is that There is not a wise man among you, not even one who will be able to judge between his brethren, but brother goes to law against brother, that before unbelievers. Now, this passage is sometimes interpreted as it's a sin for you to carry your brother to court. You are a lawyer, you are an elder in the church, you can provide good balance here. When my brother in the church offends, and let's go back to the rent scenario that we had there. What is your suggestion as a lawyer in terms of the recourse that I should take? Do I first go to a lawyer, or do I try to get my pastor to talk to the brother to try to work something out from the church's perspective?
No, it depends. And that is why, some of us, people accuse lawyers of never giving a straight answer. Yes, but it depends. At the end of the day, let me look at the passage first, because the passage is predicated on an important component. When in verse 6 says, "Is there not a wise man among you? No, not one that shall be able to judge between his brethren." Now, in a situation like this, people are crying out for justice. Do we have an impartial system in the church that can mete out justice and parties trust the system? So if you don't have that, you have no recourse than to take your brother to court. If we don't have a system where the members repose confidence in the system, and we know that we're going to get impartial judgment in the system. Now, as it relates to, I would say to people at the end of the day, it depends on the relationship, because at the end of the day, you may have a situation where you can deal with this discreetly without involving the pastors and involving the church, because in small societies, the first thing we do is take sides, and then you have the whole church fractured into camps. So unless we have a sense of of right doing, unless we have a sense of the fact that we can dispense justice whether or not we like the person, that somebody can be right even though I don't like you in the body of Christ, and we're prepared to do that, then the system is not robust enough in terms of the church judging among ourselves to do that. Yes, and I'm saying in my practice, when I'm dealing with Adventists, I'm saying if you have a situation where somebody is not paying your rent and stuff, try to get at it early. Probably get a warning letter written early. Do not wait. If the person don't pay a month or 2 months rent, it is going to be difficult to catch up at 3 and 4 and 5 months. Maybe you need to sever the relationship early. And the worst, they can go and say you're wicked and you throw them out, because again, there's always that other scenario that, you're an elder in the church, you're a pastor, you put the people out and you're wicked and this stuff, and they don't know that the bank is coming back to take up your house because you have not been able to pay the mortgage because their contribution have not been coming in. Yes, so a lot of things are tied up. So I'm saying sometimes it may be that in going for an order of possession, you may have to walk and leave the money that is owed because you're not going to recover it. Yes, but you need your property. So in that kind of, you have to balance the interest. And sometimes I'm saying, so it makes sense sometimes, depending on the congregation and where you are, that it makes sense. Yes, your elders can talk to them and try to bring them together and try to have a payment plan and that kind of thing. But if it doesn't work out, that's another month or two piled on that you're not going to recover.
That's very wise counsel. I'm seeing the perspective from which you're speaking. You seem to also be suggesting that the church must not see itself as a court.
It is not, but in that I'm also saying that there are enough trained people in the court, in the church, in the Adventist church. I think, and for those of us who believe that God has educated us to serve, that there are enough of us in the church that can look at certain things and assist the court and guide the parties and assist the church and guide the parties, before the leaders get in and mess it up. Because most of the ones that I see, when they come to us, they're already messed up, by, probably a badly drafted letter by your conference or whatever that, give a whole different twist to the scenario and that kind of thing, Now
I notice also that you're skilled in the area of arbitration.
Yes, I have.
I've had occasions when I'm referred by the court,
Right.
To deal with matters, especially family relations matter. You know, occasionally the court may call and say, listen, I have two persons here from your church, and I think they can work it out with you.
Mediation, right.
So some of those kinds of things, you know, I suppose the church can play a greater role.
Yes, I can. But then again, as I said, that we have to get to the point where Paul is saying, where there are wise people among us, you know, who can make that dispassionately and without fear or favor, you know, kind of thing. And until we get there, we're not robust enough to withstand it. I mean, some of these challenges will destroy congregations, you know.
That is correct, because frankly, you know, some persons may think that, you know, everything lies with the church board. And if you do not have the competence there, then it can cost the church.
It can. And it costs the church not only in terms of relationship to one and the church's image, you know. I mean, I've been subject to one or two of those myself, you know, and you know, where the basic principles of natural justice, do right, hear the other side, and the brethren play you. You're a leader in the church, you know the brethren play you. Generally, you have some people who are wrong and they make a path to you first, and you hear one version of events. And they go down and pick off people who they think have influence on the board, and they pick off one. And by the time the issue come up to the board, you have not even heard a version of events yet, but people have formed judgments based on one side, you know? So I guess if you get to the point where, you know, there's training and there's what, you know, that kind of, then it can work. But even the way we treat each other, if you look, was it Matthew that says if you have if somebody ever faults against you, you must go to that person, Matthew, yeah, in 18.
Yes, that's correct.
The grievances. How many of us do that? You know, the first thing you do, generally the members do, and especially women, and that's the truth. You know, you somebody, you know, is aggrieved or you're offended, and you share it with somebody just to pray. But you have already colored that person's perspective, you know? And I remember I heard a story once where this pastor's wife was taken to task by the women's ministry because they thought she was prideful. And that came out of a situation where one sister said, you know, whenever she offered her juice, she would never drink from the cup. So she thought she was better than drinking from the sister's cup. She'd always ask for a straw. Yes? And the church, you know, the pastor's wife turned up at church, everybody having potluck. And she was given an icy drink, she asked for a straw. Now, the other members would have heard that version of events. Oh, you see the evidence of her being prideful? And everybody believes that, you know. And then when the story actually came out, the lady had very, very sensitive front teeth. So the cold, icy drink was messing with her teeth, and that's why she asked for a straw. Had you gone to her based on what the Bible said, you'd have figured out among the two of you that this is just, you know, it's nothing about you. But you already take up offense and share it with somebody and say, you can pray for the you know, the growls that you have with the pastor's wife. And the body's divided over simple, trivial things, because we have to understand that we are functioning in a spiritual context too. So you have these little things that appear trivial, and the devil puts his minion on it, a principality on it. And before you know it, we have the spirit of offense pervading our congregation, and we have no power.
Now that's something we can continue to discuss, but our time is limited.
Yeah,
I do want to quickly shift to another area. You did mention earlier a difference between the criminal aspect and the civil aspect. And I want to jump back to that criminal aspect, because if I remember correctly, you did say that the church must not try to cover up criminal aspects. I have had, unfortunately, some experiences where I recall once where I advised, a pastor called and said, listen, you know, such and such a person, a mother just called me and said such and such a person has molested her daughter, this being a member of the church. And I said to the pastor, please tell her to call the police. Because it was clearly a case of child molestation. The church was not very kind to the mother because she called the police. They felt that the church should have somehow, the lady should have somehow sheltered the situation and allowed the church to deal with it. So what are those areas, especially, you know, now we are talking about the criminal aspects, where the church must try to stay clear and allow the law to run its course?
Okay, it is difficult. We are as believers. It is difficult to say stay clear, but I'm just saying don't attempt to deal with it. Yes, you can provide counsel. You can do your pastoral care. Yeah,
Yes.
the pastoral care is important in this situation because for the alleged perpetrator, you need redemption and you need the support for the victim. So the pastoral care you can't step back from. But I've seen over the years, and even that situation you mentioned, there are similar situations where we need to understand, and our church need to understand that when a crime is committed, even though there are people involved, the crime is committed against the state. And that is why you have you have the attorney general bringing it against somebody, or you have the commissioner of police against the person, the accused, because the crime is against the state. Let the state do its job. No, the same situation. I had a similar case where I had to advise on, and this is a situation where you had an elder who it's alleged, was grooming a child. Yes. And now the whole church is upset and shocked because there was in the past a previous complaint from another child. And the members again were dealt harshly with the little girl and the family that, this thing about young people being fast, that she fasts and she tell lies. So now there's another child, many years later, and the members now are filled with guilt. So the pastor have to do a lot of counseling because they're saying, had they done something before, then it may not amount to this. Now, what I find interesting is that in terms of the litigious society that we are living in, is that people are not just taking the church's word for it and your prayer for it. Yes, I read recently, I think last year, 2019, there's a case out of the Florida conference where the pastor interfered with. It's just interfered with because we're conditioned so it don't sound so bad, to have had sexual relations with two of the young ladies in the church, and even though it's a criminal matter. Predominantly, the young people the families took the decision to pursue a civil case against the church. And they're saying at the end of the day, in negligence, that the church has a duty to supervise its pastors, the church has a duty to protect the saints. Yeah. And that is going through the courts. So we're living in a different kind of society. Yes. And the issue is, will the church be seen to be complicit at the end of the day when people do not think that they have gotten justice? Or they do not think that that their situation was handled properly. Can they bring a civil action, and will they have evidence to say that we were complicit in our handling of the matter? And I'm thinking because of those reasons that we should let the law take its course, with criminal matters especially.
So letting the law take its course implies to some extent that I have an understanding of what the law is. I mean, if I do not know, for example, that the law says if there is at least in some jurisdictions, I am not sure what the situation is in Barbados, but I suppose it's not very different. In some jurisdiction, if there is a suspected child molestation case, by law, it is to be reported.
It is to be reported.
So if we have a case like that, and the law requires that this should be reported, then by all means, we should encourage reporting a case like that.
You should. And if you're a pastor, even before you would hear, somebody would tell you, yes, you have to provide support to the victim. Yes, you can provide support without trying to cover it up or being seen to be pandering to one side as opposed to the other. For example, by insisting that, okay, if this is an allegation, then you would recommend that the person go to the doctor and, have a proper medical report to confirm or, whether something happened or not. At the end of the day, it also means that you have to treat to the alleged accused, because it's only an allegation at this point, and you have to balance that interest, but it doesn't mean you have to descend into the arena as if you're telling the people what to do and not to go forward with it. Let that be their decision, and you prayerfully support whatever they decide to do.
Now let's look at another perspective. I'm moving on because there are some areas that I do want to get covered. The church operates institutions. We have schools, we have medical facilities, etc. So we do employ people. And when you have an environment where there is industrial relations, that can become a rather very tricky issue. So let's talk about this. Let's say I am a worker at a school or even the conference office, and I get a lady pregnant out of wedlock, not my wife. Or let's say I am transferred to another department, and I think it is wrong. Or, rather, since we're in the COVID-19 era, let's say that I am retrenched and I believe it is unfair. As a member of the church, working for the church, is it wrong for me to decide to take legal action? I think I'm dismissed unfairly. I think I should not have been transferred from this department to the next department. I think they dismissed me because of a moral breach. Where does the what do you say to the member of the church in a situation like this?
I say to the members, at the end of the day, each person has to be persuaded in his own mind. Yes, you can give guidance. Okay, so somebody is dismissed, for example, and you only see it as a matter of a salary or losing a job. But this is people's livelihood that is tied up in it. I will say to the members in the first course of action, try to settle, try to bring about, a peaceful resolution of the matter. Raise the issue with the administration and try to settle it. You can invite mediation, you can invite arbitration, you can go that route. Yes, but again, it premised on the basis that each party wants to do right. It is premised on the principle that each party understand what the concepts of basic fairness is. Yeah. And sometimes we can be heavy-handed in our dealing as conferences with parties. Now, when you remember your employment, and only that, one of the challenges you have in administration is the fact that a lot of your policies are antiquated. Yes, they're really, really old, and they do not speak to, if you look at them, some of them even offend the modern legislation in terms of employment practices and policy and in terms of dismissal. Yes, so you and only that, sometimes when they were written back in the day, they basically came down from another jurisdiction, and now you're operating in a totally different context. You need reviews of these things, right? So at the end of the day, if Corinthians is saying, Paul is saying, if you can't find sensible people to judge among you, then you have no recourse but to go to law. Yes, because your livelihood, your family's well-being is tied up in that. I have seen situations where church organizations decide, okay, I am going to, well, you're redundant because I probably don't like you, or you give me too much challenge on, academic boards and stuff, without understanding that redundancy at law has a specific meaning. And I've been written to them to treat that properly. If they don't do it, then you have to have your labor tribunal to pronounce on it, because the church won't do right. So sometimes it's not only the members' fault. As an organization, we have to do better. We need to revise some of the antiquated systems that we have. You mentioned the whole issue of a moral fall. And I kept saying for years now that the whole section, first of all, how many ministers, for example, and workers and employees routinely are made to sign the policy handbook? Because the first thing, when we have an issue, they're going to say, oh, but I never saw that, I never signed to that. No, if this is a part of the contract, reduce it into a simple document and let the person sign onto a simple document, instead of just handing a book to the person. And 15 years down the line, you have a problem where they're infringing on some policy and need to treat. I said, but I never saw that policy. I've never reviewed that policy. I never signed onto that policy. Now you're alleging that they did. The court is going to say, you're alleged, you have to prove it. So I'm saying the systems are antiquated. We need to get forms. We need to get, precedent where things are done in a transparent manner. Now, when somebody sign on, they need to understand off the bat, and only understand it can be written into a basic contract of employment that your employer can transfer you from whatever. You're in the South Leeward conference, you have a number of territories making up that conference. If it is written in the contract that the person signed, don't just hand a policy handbook, reduce these things into contract. You may have to pay some money up front to some lawyers, but it's going to cost save you a lot of money on the back end.
It may satisfy you to know that in the South Leeward Conference, We do have contracts of employment. You know, we have taken the long route, and you know, as an administrator, it is, I'm aware that we do practice very regular consultations with our attorney before we make certain decisions, which leads me to the next question, because again, we live in a very litigious society, and once upon a time when folks would not think about suing the church, that is not so anymore. I've heard of circumstances where people go to the church to steal, fell down, got injured, and sue the church and won. So it's an interesting society we live in. But what can the church do to protect itself in cases like this, especially when we are employees and employers rather, and when we do have to make decisions with respect to labor relations, or even, let's talk about that for a while.
Be guided by your territory's labor laws. They are there, be guided by them. There are too many of our leaders who decide that a theology degree or degrees make you omnicompetent. You don't know. Yes, and a simple thing, sometimes you may get a letter in response to, you know, a minister or somebody you want to discipline. You get a letter from a lawyer and it sounds typical in English and you figure, well, I can respond. But in your response, you prejudice the organization because you never had somebody look it over, you know? So be guided by the labor laws in the country. You have to balance that with the church's image. You also have to balance that with the fact that more and more they're saying as an organization, you need to provide a safe place for your people. So even if the laws are not there, you can still be caught under negligence and different thoughts. Yes, so you really need to have sensible people that you're going to take legal advice from. Yes, and you have to be aware, and I keep saying that. I remember I said to a president one time, you know what? Good advice ain't always favorable. So I may not be able to give you the advice that you want to hear, but good advice is not always favorable. Yes, but take guidance. Take guidance and be aware of your labor laws. And at the end of the day, cultivate a working relationship with your employees where, I mean, happy employees seldom want to sue the church. And when you're making decisions, make sure there's a transparent way of making your decisions. Yes? So I can look at, and a member can look across, an employee can look across and say, oh, you have a situation where you have to cut costs. So people have to go, have a policy, something, a document. This is the basis on which the decisions were made. Yes? So people can look and say, oh, well, sister so-and-so, when you're going to say we're going to make a decision based on who came in last. So last on first off. Oh, but the pastor wife come on after me and she's still in a job. You know, and it builds a level of resentment because transparent. If we practice transparency, then I think we'll have less litigation.
Very sound advice. You know, I really wish we could explore this a little more, but there are lots of questions, and there are a few other areas we want to touch, but there are lots of questions, and I do want to provide the opportunity for you to be able to respond to some of the questions that our viewers are asking. So let's go to one of the earlier questions. One viewer asked, how can we strengthen? I think this is when we were talking about the you know, the different types of courts, CCJ, High Court, Magistrate Court, etc. How can we strengthen the judicial system in small countries where everyone knows someone and sometimes justice appears to be thwarted by who knows who, or people's social standing in society? Interesting question.
Yeah. I think that's a question more for the politicians than from the lawyers. We can only do what we do when we get officers of the court. Yes, but at the end of the day, a robust democracy demands that the people believe in the system. There's a phrase that we use, that justice must not only be done, but it must manifestly be seen to be done. So the average man on the street, when I'm talking to you, we can talk like a reasonable people without even a legal background. The average man on the street must get a sense that right was done in that case. Yes, and it's important to our political administrators and our politicians that people believe in your system, because if not, then you're going to have vigilante justice where people are going to take the law into their hands. Yes, a good governance demand that. One of the things, I mean, some territories have done, they have basically insulated the judges from political pressure. So instead of a politician appointing a judge, some territories, for example, Barbados have a judicial service commission. It doesn't mean it's beyond political interference. I'm not going to say that at all. Yes, because I would be lying, not true. But you have a judicial service commission that appoints lawyers, that appoints judges to the courts. In that sense, it seems at least to be isolated, insulated from the prime minister telling somebody, this is my person for the job, you know? So service commissions and that kind of thing is one way of insulating. Having a public, what you call it, advertisement for positions and stuff. I've seen that done across the territories. And yeah, that also helps.
Another question from another viewer. We're seeking to, oh, I missed that one. Let me just go again. My apologies there. Let me pull this question up again. Okay, here is another question. What can be done to ensure that the poor has equal access to justice? What can be done to improve access as they relate to people not being able to meet the legal fees, which are so high?
Well, I'm not sure what happens in most territories, but for example, Barbados, we have a legal aid scheme. So there's a legal aid commission that does provide support in most territories. Trinidad has too. I did legal aid in Trinidad back in the day, where there's a legal aid system where certain cases you're given assistance, usually with children and family matters for sure, criminal matters, because liberty is paramount. And most territories though have some mechanism inside there in terms of aiding the poor to have access to justice. And another thing is we have to determine what justice is, because there are some people who can go the route of alternative dispute resolution, which is far cheaper than the courts. But there is this notion among poor people that they want a day in court and they want to see a judge face, and that is going to cost you. So another way of doing that is to pursue alternative means of settling your disputes. Yes, it will generally work out to be cheaper.
Interesting, and that perhaps leads into this next question. Well, not exactly. So let me. There was a question here on arbitration, but I'll come to it. Since this one is up, let me ask it. What if a member took a loan from you, $5,000, under false pretenses, and said they would pay you back at a certain time and did not?
Oh, me? So they want to know, I'm not lending any member any money.
Interesting.
so they want to know, okay, at the end of the day, okay, generally you're not going to lend money to a stranger. And there's a saying that generally when you lend money to family and friends, you lend what you can afford to lose.
Maybe you need to say that again.
You know, it's the truth. You know, there are certain things I don't do. I don't do sureties for certain people. I won't do sureties, because if you don't pay, then I'm going to end up with paying, and I had no benefit from what you did. Yes, when you don't lend money to strangers generally, it's usually family or friend. And if you're doing that, you lend what you think you can afford to lose, because you're going to mess up a relationship. Yes.
Sometimes. Sorry to interrupt you, but just on the question of surety, you know, some people may look at you and say, well, you're not Christian because you can afford to and you didn't. Where do we balance, you know, in terms of protecting ourselves and appearing to be good Christian citizens?
These are things by settling certain things up front. Yes. As I said, I am not going to do surety for people. Yeah, because at the end of the day, when you do that, you're putting your family in jeopardy. If the person doesn't pay and you're faced with all of these debts that do not belong to you and did not accrue to you and your family get no benefit from, the resources you're going to take to pay off those debts are going to be family resources, yes? And the other point is, you ask the person, what can you afford to put up? There has to be something in terms of debt that, in terms of collateral that the person can afford to put up. Find something to put up as security. And I'm saying that not only in relation to loans and debts, I'm saying it too in relation to criminal matters where the court is asking for surety in the sum of so and so. Some of your family members are caught in, in criminal behavior and they want to put them on bail and they need a surety. And I'm saying to you, I do not recommend that you do that. I've seen it over and over, especially you have, a family situation where you may be the only one who, is getting, a break in life. Don't play the black tax where everybody look at you to bail out everybody else. Yes, because it can lead to your impoverishment.
Very well.
You
Very
make the
well.
decision up front.
I want to ask another question here. I mean, we have lots of questions. I doubt we're going to be able to answer all of them today, but here's another question. This is an interesting one. Can a pastor write a contract and allow two members to sign for a payment plan? Is that a legal document? And your suggestions on a pastor being involved in something like that, please?
Can a pastor write a payment? It sounds like the members are, the members, I'm just trying to clarify and make sure I have the issues right. So the members have something going on and the person trying to resolve it has signed up the payment contract for the parties. Is that what you understood from that?
Well, that's my assumption. I am thinking that is the idea here.
Yeah, I can make, yeah. So based on that assumption, if the pastor is attempting to help the parties and the parties have agreed that this is what we're going to do, and he drafted. I would not if I was in his position. I would send him to make the clerk draft it or somebody. Yes, but I don't think nothing is wrong with that because at the end of the day, the contract is going to be signed by both parties. So it's not the pastor's contract, even though he facilitated the contract. It is actually a contract of the parties.
Okay, but does he have to sign as witness?
He can sign as witness. There's a witness isn't here nor there.
Okay, wonderful. Another question. In the case where the person is an unbeliever, what is the best course of action to take? Now, I'm not sure what this is making a reference to. I can't tell you whether they're talking about a member and a non-member involved in a dispute. I'm not sure.
Well, we'll probably invite the person to give us some more clarification, some more information.
Yeah, so if you're listening,
sure what to answer.
We do need to get some additional clarity on that particular question.
Yeah.
All right, now we do have another question. The court has the important role of implementing checks and balances to regulate human behavior. Why should the church be exempt as an institution, impartially, in a rare gem?
In what?
Let me read
this
again. The court has the important role of implementing checks and balances to regulate human behavior. Why should the church be exempt as an institution, impartially, in a rare gem? I get the sense they're saying that the church is a moral body and the church should also be able to adjudicate. I'm not sure if that's what the question is. I don't know what you get from it.
Well, I'm not sure what the person is asking, but in terms of the church does adjudicate on matters. The church does adjudicate on matters involving membership. Yes. You take decisions about who hold membership. You take decisions about who hold offices. You take decisions about who is excluded from membership for whatever reason. So in the scope of the church's operation, the church does have areas in which the church dispense legal quasi legal functions.
Okay, very well. You know, there's another area. Well, let's deal with this question here. If we can squeeze in another area after that. But Is it wise to look at how Jesus dealt with matters he was accused of? Will a child of God get true justice on this earth? What does it mean to take up your cross and follow Jesus relative to this topic?
All right, but in terms of following Jesus, I mean, Jesus had, I don't see in my reading of the Bible that Jesus was exposed to the full ambit or scope of what the average person living today is in terms of commercial activity in the West, family relations, etc. I know Jesus was subjected basically to the criminal aspect of things, more where you have unjust decisions being rendered against him, the kind of thing. At the end of the day, I'm saying there are instances where you go to law not only to be pronounced right or wrong, but you want the court to set a precedent as to a course of conduct, yes, that have far-reaching ramifications. Yes, so at the end of the day, if you're saying, so it's always easy when we're dealing with small matters. But what if you have a multi-million-dollar contract and there's a clause in there that needs to be interpreted to deal with our business? Are you going to say, okay, turn the other cheek, walk away from it, and you ruin the opportunity to continue this business, ruin the opportunity for further business dealings with the other side, simply because you didn't get that pronounced on? Yes, so every move to the court is not necessarily an adversarial, you are wrong and I am right situation. That's the point I'm making.
Now, from the perspective of an elder in the church,
right,
if someone were to accuse you of breaking the Sabbath for having this discussion this afternoon, how would you respond?
Okay, all right. I'm a part of Israel. This is Israel. Israel is not only a place where you come to worship. Israel also functions as an economy. And everything that touches and concerns Israel in terms of functioning as an economy, how we live together as brethren, is also going to affect the spiritual temperature of the church. So I think the discussion is quite in order.
Okay, very well, very well. Here, you know, that's an important question, because sometimes I find that there is a narrow-mindedness among some members with respect to our scope and function as Christians. And you know, we relate as citizens. We can't live in isolation from the rest of the world. Jesus said we are in the world, but not of the world. And so we mingle, we touch people, and it is important. In fact, let me ask this question. You know, in terms of a pitfall, and we have 4 minutes. We haven't touched some areas, so we may need to come back with a part 2 sometime in maybe November because of schedule. But let's end on this one. The pitfall of not being careful. I'm a member. I am fairly, let's say, fairly well off. I see a brother or a sister who is struggling. I decide to have compassion, and I decide to this struggling brother, listen, you're unemployed. I'm going to give you a job. I'm going to give you a job as a maintenance guy or somebody to take care of my property. I just word of mouth say to him, listen, I'm going to pay you X dollars a month or X dollars a week. I sign no contract. Is that okay? Is there anything wrong with that? Because these are things that members do all the time.
Yeah, there's not necessarily wrong with that, except people need to be aware that, so what you just explained is a verbal contract, yes? As far as you're concerned, you only dealt with time of work and how much you're going to pay him. But based on our laws across the territories, we have what is called implied terms into the contract. So the court or the law will read into that contract of employment certain terms. Yes, so the quoted and the implied terms both by the court and by statute, whatever your labor laws are, you know, is going to imply into that contract terms like what do you do in terms of benefits that should be taken out and returned to government because it's employment. The implied terms that you must have a safe place of work, all of those things, a safe system of work depending on the nature of the job, all of those things are read into a contract even though you didn't write it down, you know? So to be safe and you want to know, you know, what is it that, I mean, because you may just see it as an odd job, you know, and it's nothing big. The consequences to you can be far reaching. So maybe it's something you need to formalize that, because the fact that it's just like you're renting your house and say my house is $500 or $600 a month, coming the 1st of November. But the law implies a whole set of terms into those contracts. Terms implied by statute, your landlord and tenant laws and your property laws and that kind of thing. So you need to be aware that whether you have it written or not, other terms will be implied by the law into those contracts.
Because, for example, if the brother now after a year or two says, listen, I need vacation.
Yeah, he's entitled to vacation pay because your labor law says he's entitled to vacation pay, to vacation or pay in lieu of vacation.
So as a matter of proper stewardship, because right. we are supposed to be good stewards, do I, as a member, have a right to know these things and to be guided so that I can make proper decisions, so that I do not put my family, myself into serious legal issues later on in life?
Indeed, and that is why we are in the church, and the church need to learn to the members to employ the resources that the Lord put among you so that you better function in business. At the end of the day, the determination, is he an employee or is he an independent contractor? Because again, there are different legal outcomes depending on what you want him to be. So have a talk with a lawyer and formalize those kind of things before you put him in your place to work. Yeah, well, we're here to guide the church.
Attorney, our time is up.
Yeah.
We did not answer all the questions, but we are extremely grateful for the insights that you shared this afternoon. There are a number of issues I would personally like to follow up on, but we are out of time. So I'm putting you on notice that we're going to be calling on you again for part 2. I honestly felt that, you know, this subject, we would have been able to dispatch with it quite easily, but there are a number of far-reaching issues that you have raised, and I trust that from the responses in the chat, I see that there are still a number of questions that viewers have. We want to express our profound appreciation for your presence with us today. Well, thank you so much. Most people did not know that you filled in last minute because we had someone else scheduled. So we really appreciate your presence with us. Thank you so much. God bless you richly. To our viewers, we want to remind you that Let's Talk continues next Saturday afternoon. Next Saturday afternoon, we are going to be talking with Dr. Patrick Ogutu out of the United Kingdom. We are discussing how do we relate to genetically modified foods as Christians? Is it comfortable to know that somebody is interfering with the genome of the food that I eat? I read some time ago that they are taking genes from pigs and putting them in tomatoes, etc. How do we relate to these kinds of things? We're going to explore those issues next week. The following week, October 24, is Creation Sabbath, and we're going to be having a very intriguing discussion on theistic evolution. Can I believe in evolution while still being a Christian? We have a professor from the University of the Southern Caribbean who would be our special guest then. And then on October 31 and November 7, we went ahead and scheduled 2 sessions for this one. It may run into 3, but we are going to be talking about reproductive technologies. You are married, you can get pregnant. Should you do fertility treatment? What are the implications? What about surrogate motherhood? What about artificial insemination? What are the legal ramifications? We are going to be discussing those issues. And as I indicated to you, we have a professional, someone who is in that area, quite adept with the information there. So we have a lot of things lined up for you. And then Attorney Franklyn, we have to come back with part 2 of this very intriguing discussion. Okay. So that's all the time we have. We want to thank our viewers for joining. God's blessings to you. And we will see you again next week at 3 p.m. for another edition of